We want to welcome on David Stockman, former director of the Office of Management and Budget under President Ronald Reagan. Sir, thanks for making the time for us.
Happy to be with you.
Coronavirus has exposed many weaknesses in our government, state and the federal, among them national debt, which it seems that Congress has ignored for decades. How worried are you that we will get to a point where America won't be able to pay the interest on our debt, much less pay down the debt at all?
Well, I have a news flash for Governor Cuomo and most of Washington. We do not have a rich uncle named Sam. We are heading for disaster fiscally at a speed that is breathtaking. They have now passed 3 or 4 bills. There's all of this additional pending for the state bailouts that you've been talking about. But even before that, we're going to spend $7 trillion in this fiscal year. Revenue is collapsing, and we'll get to that in a moment, to less than $3 trillion because of the disaster of lockdown nation. We're going to borrow $4 trillion this year, 19% of GDP. That's World War II scale when we were fighting a global war. So I think what we need to understand is that lockdown nation is the greatest catastrophe of modern times. It is happening because we've allowed a few extreme people and the governors and mayors to literally put the entire economy under house arrest by creating almost hysteria. I would say, the Salem witch trials level of hysteria about the coronavirus. Now, here are the facts. Number one, 95% of the population of America is not in harm's way. Even the data that comes out from the CDC or New York State proves that. This attacks the elderly. It attacks people with already serious life-threatening conditions, but it is not an across-the-board, grim reaper that's going to take everyone down and require all of us to be in house arrest. Here's what the CDC numbers show as of April 18th for the 3 months that this has been going on. If you take the population under 24, that's 103 million people. There have only been 36 deaths in all of the United States attributable to the coronavirus. That's, per 100,000, that's a fraction that I can't even say because it would take too long to put in the zeros. By contrast...
I think, Mr. Stockman... Yeah, Mr. Stockman, I think you've made a very good point here. So let's examine, if you and I can, how our irresponsible and childlike public officials have behaved up until this point, because they have squandered the country's wealth. They've not behaved responsibly. So when we're hit with a crisis, it's exposed. For example, our Congress has been doing everything it can that is not articulated in the Constitution. But the one thing they are directed to do by law is to budget. And they're not doing that. We haven't done a budget in this country in decades.
Oh, I agree with that. We had $1 trillion deficit going in after 10 years of recovery when we were at the very top of the business cycle. You're supposed to balance the budget, even run a surplus. And the deficits have just been accumulating. We're now at 24 trillion, and we've got another 15 trillion coming down the pike in the next 4 or 5 years because of what was built in, plus all of this massive throwing money at the problem that's been passed without even a committee hearing, no committee reports, no votes, no debate. It's just money spending like we've never seen before. And that's why I think we have to understand the solution is not to hand out money to everybody, big business, small business, households, the unemployed, the employed, airlines, the shale industry. Everybody got their hand out in Washington. We need to open up the economy. That's the problem. We saw today another huge increase. We got 27 million people laid off in the last 5 weeks. That's 8 times the worst 5 weeks at the bottom of the Great Recession. So let's not spend money. Let's not destroy the fiscal basis of our entire country. Let's focus on what the problem is. That's protecting the elderly and those who already have illnesses like hypertension and diabetes and respiratory illnesses and, our artery and blood illnesses.
I get it. I understand exactly where you're going, Mr. Stockman. Last thing, a lot of people out there like the Cuomos of the world are saying all we got to do is just print more money and everything will be fine. Is that going to make everything fine, sir?
No, it's going to destroy the system. The Fed is utterly out of control. It was already. And in the last month and like 5 weeks, it's printed nearly $2.5 trillion of more money right out of thin air to buy these bonds so that everybody in Washington can pretend that there's a free lunch and that we can borrow like there's no tomorrow. Well, you can't do that. It's going to destroy the basis of the entire financial system because it's fraud. It is just flat out fraud on a massive scale coming out of the Fed today, which is why the politicians on Capitol Hill think they can spend and borrow without any consequence.
Yep. All right. Yep. Former OMB director under the Reagan administration, Mr. Stockman. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, folks.